Excellent. So you can get to this website by either Googling Miami Open for Business, entering miamiopenforbusiness.org or miamiopenforbusiness.com in your web browser. On some occasions, you might end up at the Miami Foundation's website, and it looks a little bit something like this. So keep going. When you're at the Miami Foundation website, you'll see this here. You'll click, we have a new website, and that's when you'll end up on our main website for this year. So if you do ever end up on the Miami Foundation website, know that you have to come over to this one. And also just a quick reminder, we are from the Miami Foundation, but the Open for Business initiative is a little bit separate and different than what we historically do. So it's a little bit different than our community grants funding. We have some requirements that have been imposed by the original funder of these funds, Wells Fargo, some constraints, limitations, and also opportunities. So for example, if you've applied for foundation funding in the past, know that this is a very different program than how we typically do not funding for our nonprofits. We elected to make sure that Open for Business could also go to nonprofits and not just small businesses, but we still need to hew to the guidelines from the original funder. So when you land on this Miami Open for Business website, you'll be greeted by a pop-up box to enroll in our newsletter. If you're not already on the newsletter listserv, highly recommend getting on that. That's where we have all of the updates about events, workshops, deadlines, etc. So it'll be the very first thing that you do, and you can click here. Once you're finished enrolling in the website, or excuse me, the newsletter, you'll want to go back to the homepage. So then on this homepage is where you'll exit out of that newsletter pop-up. You go under apply and you go down to the micro grant. As mentioned, there's 2 other financial products that we offer, but we won't be walking through them today. So what is this micro grant for, and what can you buy? That's one of the most important things to cover off the bat. This can be used to either purchase technology for your nonprofit. That includes hardware and software, things like laptops, computers, cameras, printers, drones, basically anything that runs technologically that is a hard asset you can request money for. You can also request software, however. So we have folks who maybe want Razor's Edge, Microsoft Office, QuickBooks. Maybe there's some specialty software that you need for your organization. You can include that in your request. We do ask that folks choose between either technology or equipment and machinery so that we can maximize the number of businesses that we reach with a finite amount of money. So when we say equipment and machinery, we're talking about fixed assets that go into your organization that are not technological. So we have folks who've asked for maybe furniture, conference equipment. We've also seen folks ask for players' uniforms for equipment, musical instruments. I can think of a lot of examples on the small business side. So for example, commercial stoves, cleaning equipment, coffee makers, etc. That is everything that we mean when we say equipment and machinery. This does mean, however, that this grant cannot be used for general program expenses. You can't use it to underwrite your salary, your staffing, your overhead, your rent, any of those miscellaneous expenses. That is just something that has been imposed by the funder. It's really supposed to help you buy these assets, which sometimes can be hard to find a grant for capital products. Just want to make sure that everyone in the room is eligible, and we'll do an eligibility screener when we start the application itself. Your nonprofit does need to be led by somebody who falls into one of these identity groups. We've often seen either the CEO, the president, or the board chair or the board president as well. Your organization does need to be around for at least 2 years and have less than $1 million in your annual operating budget as demonstrated by a 990 or supporting document. We're also serving organizations that are based in Miami-Dade County, and that also provide a community benefit to Miami-Dade County. So this is what you need to abide by to order to get access to the application. But then there's also things that we will score. And so we'll walk through those today when we go question by question in the application. So it's okay to be eligible, but then once your application is received by the deadline, we'll also have some scoring metrics. And this is what determines our funding decisions. Very different than maybe another Miami Foundation or a different grant offering. The things that we look for when we score is, for example, whether the owner or the lead of that nonprofit represents multiple aspects of disadvantage. So along the dimensions previously mentioned, Black, Latino, queer, disabled, and or veteran, making sure that there's a concrete plan to acquire the asset and use it to transform the trajectory of your organization, and that you demonstrate that in the narrative questions, that you provide a good or a service that benefits the local community. So in the case of small businesses, you're not, dealing primarily with international exports or working in a sin industry, et cetera. We want to make sure that the org has enough strong capacity to remain operational. So if we were to give you this grant, would you go under in the next 2 years? And then while it's not required to offer employment opportunities, you do get a point for that during scoring. And then lastly, if you're served in one of our priority neighborhoods, which we'll show you in a second. So if you are delivering services in, for example, Alapata, Overtown, Miami Gardens, Homestead, etc., you get an extra point or 2 during scoring. So these are the eligibility criteria in order to be eligible for this funding opportunity. We already talked about what you can apply for with that money. And here's how we make decisions. The criteria are here. I do want to let you guys know that it's like any grant opportunity, it's pretty competitive. Last year, we received over 100 applications from nonprofits, and we were able to fund about 25 of them. So even many of you who applied last year, it's not necessarily a reflection of your proposal. It is sheerly the competitive nature of this funding opportunity. However, if you did already apply, you can always reapply. You can also request a feedback call with us where we open up your specific application. I know Cornell has already availed himself of this opportunity where we look very specifically at what your organization submitted last year and give you some pointers. And then lastly, this is a one-time opportunity. Nonprofits cannot continue to receive funding after they've already been funded. So folks who are maybe in the middle to the high end of the pile know that the top scoring folks are not going to be resubmitting applications. So that will work in your favor. Lastly, I'll touch on the timeline and then we'll get into it with the application. So they are due by the end of the day next Wednesday, May 31st. We'll spend the month of June scoring them, and then decisions will be communicated in July, and you'll be able to purchase your asset if selected between July and August. So now that we've gotten all the administrative minutiae out of the way, want to make sure that you're eligible, you know what we're looking for in this application. This is where you can begin. If you are a small business, you would click this link and you would apply on the Miami OFB website. Everyone here is a nonprofit, so we're going to click on this link, which will take us to Submittable. So in order to access Submittable, you do already need to create an account. I'm going to create a dummy account today because I'm not going to use my admin one. And then first, what you'll want to do is take the pre-qualifying questionnaire. So I'm raising this because I know that some folks have not done the login process yet, and you can only do the eligibility screener once you create a login. So I'm going to create a dummy account, and you can follow along on yours if you'd like. I'm just going to make something up here. And once you create an account with Submittable, then you'll be able to access that eligibility screener. So those same questions that we just walked through, you'll walk through yourself. So for example, are you a 501c3 or fiscal sponsor or government entity, et cetera? If you are one of these, you can apply under Miami Foundation. If you are a for-profit small business, we do ask that you go back and apply on that website that we were just on. Your organization does need to be based in and predominantly serve Miami-Dade County. Your annual budget needs to be less than $1 million. You need to be around for at least 2 years. You cannot have received funding in a prior round. And then we'll ask for more detail, but your organization does need to be led by somebody from one of the following backgrounds. If you get all of those answers right, you'll unlock access to the application. So show of hands, how many folks have gotten to this stage in the application? Great. And I know folks at Juggernaut, you've already done this at least one time around. Anybody have any questions about where we're at so far, what we've discussed? Okay, great. So what we'll do now is we'll walk through the application in a little bit more detail. I'm going to make it a little bigger so you guys can see everything up close. And so at the very beginning, we'll ask for a lot of organizational detail, very standard information. We do ask that you submit the EIN that you plan to get funded under. So for example, some organizations have a 501c3. Some of them have a foundation that undergirds their entity. Be sure to include the EIN that the funding would be dispersed to. When we ask about your organization address, we are hoping that for the organization's site where services are delivered. We had some applicants last year who use a Broward-based address because that's where their home is domiciled. We do ask to make sure that you're eligible for this opportunity to use the physical address of where you deliver your services. And then while it's not required to be in any one of these community areas to receive funding, you do get some extra points for having your organization in these community areas. Quick overview of your org mission. This is pretty semi-standard boilerplate that you probably already have available. Pick the issue area that best describes your work, and then the primary contact for the grant. If you're a grant writer, in the case of, I believe it was Ebony, you may want to put your name down here, but we also are going to ask for information about the executive director. So if you're a grant writer, for example, you would put your information in primary contact and then would say no, which then triggers us to ask a little bit more about your org lead. If the primary contact is, or maybe a different person on the team, just note the difference between primary contact and CEO. Now in this section, we'd like to get to know your organization staff a little bit better from a demographics perspective. These are all self-reported questions. Somebody asked me last week what they should put for their cultural identity. I really can't tell you that. That's between you and the Lord. And so whatever categories you feel best describe, and maybe you need to confer with your executive director if you're filling it out on their behalf. But in essence, we want to get, really granular detail about who we're serving. We want to make sure we're addressing disparities that we know in South Florida. We know that the typical racial categories used elsewhere in the United States don't suffice to describe our heterogeneity. So we do ask not only for race and ethnicity data, but cultural identity. These middle questions are not required, but at a minimum, race, gender, age group, and following disadvantaged backgrounds are required responses. So these are all going to be about the executive director or CEO, or if you're applying under your board president or board CEO as the lead of your organization, these questions would describe them. Please interrupt if you have questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand. I'm happy to be here to address any questions while we're all on the line together.
Brittany, question for you.
Yes, please.
In reference to the software, what about if an organization is trying to build an app that's specific to their software, for instance, to capture information about their clients or a place for their clients to come to get information? Is that something that's covered?
Yeah, great question, Ebony. We just got formal approval from our funder for this funding cycle to include web development and app development as allowable technology costs. I'll just drive that difference home for you all. It does need to be, it's allowable under this grant if you're using those funds to produce a finite fixed asset, like build an app or build a new website. You cannot, however, use technology microgrant funds to fund more ongoing or operational expenses related to marketing or website maintenance. And so, for instance, a marketing coordinator, Google Ads, more maintenance activities, no. But if you're using it, the hard line here is if it's producing an asset for the business, like a website or app, yes, it's allowable under the program.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So in this portion of the application, we're going to just be doing a lot of organizational demographics, firmographics, just stats about your entity before we get into the narrative questions and the funding request itself. So here's what we'll want to know a little bit more about your org in terms of your budget size. If you exceed 1 million, you should have been turned around at the eligibility screener, but we do want to get a sense, make sure that we're funding orgs that are big and small under the $1 million ceiling. We want to get a sense of how many employees you have. Please use full-time equivalent and to denote that in case you have 2 part-time employees. And then we'd like to know a little bit about the racial and demographic breakdown of your staff at your organization. We do look at whether organizations are offering employment opportunities to folks who hail from marginalized backgrounds. And so, for example, we also want to get a sense of how many of your job openings are what are called quality jobs. The living wage was determined by Miami-Dade County. It's debatable. We can have an offline conversation about where these numbers came from, but we do want to get a sense of if you're not only providing employment opportunities, but are also providing jobs that offer benefits, prioritize hiring folks from marginalized backgrounds, et cetera. The small business opportunity, for what it's worth, does require you to fill out a form for every single every single staff person. We are not asking you to do that. So all that we ask is that you be judicious in the way that you complete this about your staff. And then lastly, getting a sense of the size of your organization, whether that's a family unit, youth, et cetera, letting us know about approximately how many folks you serve annually. So now that we've gone through all of the organizational background, we'll get into the meat of this application, which is your funding request. As mentioned, you do need to pick within one of these 2 categories. So think about what is going to be the most pressing investment for your nonprofit at this time. If you select technology, you'll get a follow-up question, whether or not you just want hardware, software, or whether you're bundling them. This is a change from last year's application to allow more flexibility. You can now bundle these requests, or maybe you just want to get equipment and machinery. And so here's where the funding, the dollar amount will go in, and that will be substantiated when you have the proposed use of funds below. I will share with you that approximately 50% of applicants ask for the full 20,000, and not every full funding request can be honored at that amount, so that we can get more organizations funded through the program. So if you enumerate that you need, 3 heavyweight copy printer scan fax machines, and they're each $5,000, we may elect for you to purchase 2 of them instead of 3, so that we could award that additional 5 to another organization. And so you can request the full 20K, but just want to explain that note there about where we do reserve some discretion. This sentence here, please, Maya, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a really quick question on that point right there. So like you just said, if they were requesting for 3 printers and they were awarded, you guys would notify us to say, hey, we rather you purchase 2, or we're able to fund those 2 versus those 3, or would you just rather us submit the application with almost like the lowest in mind?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Maya. And I will say the only time where we start to cut down the funding request is for the applications that score the highest are typically the ones that get the full funding amount. And then applications that score high, but maybe not as high as the first 10 to 15, that's when we'll start to truncate the funding amount. So it's always in your best interest to go for it, and go for it big. But what you need to do is substantiate the request, so that when you say I need 3 printers, that's because we have 3 physical locations, we have 3 after school programs, we have 3 part-time youth staff who work the printer, because you need to sell us on the vision, and then we'll go all in. Whereas folks who are more likely to get money shaved off of their funding request, they scored well, but maybe not top marks in the top of the pile. Does that help?
Understood. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
So don't sell yourself short when you're making the funding request at the beginning, but then we do want to know, just to not catch anyone off guard, if you're ending up getting funded less for the full amount requested.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Really, really good question. And so here's where there's a little bit of confusion last year. So we've now separated these 2 different questions. The first is a summary of your request. So what we want to get is, like, in a nutshell, or at an eyes glance, what it is that you are requesting. So that, for example, if you are selected, this would go in marketing collateral. I'll pick on some of the folks on the call, but for example, this technology or equipment request is to, buy podcast equipment to launch a community development podcast to serve South Florida economic development organizations, period. We want to get a sense of, in a nutshell, if, for instance, the reviewers have not had time to review your entire application, they know exactly what you're going to buy and for what end. But that is very different than this next question. This is where you're going to really walk us through the specificity of what you plan to buy, where you will acquire it, and how you will deploy it. So the first pro tip that I always recommend is working on these narrative questions in a different document. Submittable will save your progress as you work on it, but it's a very constrained text box. If you want, you can use this bottom right-hand corner to change the size of the text box, but I always recommend putting this in Microsoft Word, putting it in Google Docs, and working on it elsewhere. So when we say describe more detail, this is where we really want to see specificity. Some folks say that they need to purchase, 3 AC units to cool their facility, and they'll move on to the next question. That doesn't necessarily engender confidence on the scoring team that you've done your due diligence about how much each of these units cost. You know exactly where you're going to procure it when the time for funding comes. You plan to put them in a specific location in your facility. There's a reason why you need them now more than ever. There's maybe a strategic plan that prompted you to buy these items. You have been saving up for them. Really, really get into the detail. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to navigate away from the application shortly to show you all a webinar that we did with Access Helps, where we pulled out actual responses that we received from organizations last year to tell you what a high and a low scoring response looks like. So if we navigate back to the Open for Business website that you'll remember where we got to originally, if you navigate to the Get Support tab and you go through the program, this is where all of our technical assistance organizations are listed. So Radical Partners is here today serving the nonprofits. But if you keep scrolling down and you head to the middle of the page, you can see our info session where we offered tips on how to make a successful application. You click here to get the application slides. The presentation slides. There's a lot of information in here that we won't go through. You already got the gist of, the eligibility and the scoring process. But if you head down to approximately slide 20, here's where we tell you, or 15, this is where we tell you how competitive last year's process was. So for instance, there was a 1 in 5 chance of getting funding, even if your application was very strong. It's simply a numbers game. Here's some common reasons why folks are not getting selected. So for example, there were folks last year who didn't understand how this grant opportunity worked. They asked for a technology microgrant to buy a vehicle or to buy a van. We have a 0% loan for nonprofits to finance vans. And so that's, one of the main reasons. Another reason is maybe disregarding the eligibility criteria. If we looked at your 990 and you're pulling in more than $1 million in your annual operating budget, you haven't been around for 2 years, or you're not based in Miami-Dade County, that did not look favorable. And then these questions, or these points here I just mentioned, the lack of specificity in your funding request. So folks who said, we will buy scanners, laptops, printers, tablets, and we will deploy them in our youth STEM lab. And that was the extent of the application. That is not going to be as strong and specific as somebody who can really enumerate what they're buying. So here is an example from a proposal we received last year. Notice that it did used to say 2 to 3 sentences. We've separated that out, so that's not the objective of the purpose question. But here is a proposal I'll just read through briefly. This organization told us exactly the quantity that they planned on purchasing, what those units were, barcode scanners, and why. Not just that it will help us be more efficient, but specifically, this is in a food pantry context, families walking through the workflow and the process, helping us understand how it benefits your data collection. It improves the accuracy of your metrics. It minimizes paper waste, and it prevents duplicate food disbursements. We can't be an expert in every single one of your industries, but telling us exactly what you're going to buy and how you're going to deploy it in your organization, the difference that it will make for you, your staff, and the people that you serve. We contrast this to an application. This was, the extent of what this person described. They didn't specify the type of devices or the type of computer programming that they would purchase. Run our operations can be interpreted as a little vague. And then assisting the community in need, we're all here to help the community out, whether that's seniors, elders, animals, the environment, really help us understand that impact and what that's going to mean for you in terms of the investment. And so this just, wanted to show you guys when we have this question here, describe the use of funds, what you plan to purchase, how you go about buying them and deploying them. That's the kind of level of detail that we are looking for. This is pretty much the only field where you get to make your case for what you want to buy and how. So we really ask you to provide detail. So I'm going to pause there because that was a lot of information, and I'm sure you have some questions. Yes.
Hi, this is Tanya. I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you want us, so for instance, if we are proposing to purchase multiple software, such as video editing, QuickBooks, MailChimp, stuff like that, do you also want us to include, like, for instance, okay, subscription would cost us X amount per year within this? Yes?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And one thing you can do, sometimes there's an opportunity to bundle multiple years of a subscription if you buy in advance. While this is just a 1-year grant opportunity and will fund you, in the summer, you can pre-buy multiple years of software in your funding request if your vendor allows you to. So absolutely, I would enumerate that. I'm typing here, for example, but let's say that you need like 2 13-inch MacBook Air with 32, I'm literally making things up, hard drive, right? And then Amazon told me that this costed, I'm literally making things up here. And then you said 3 years of MailChimp for 500 subscribers, right? And that's going to be, I'm literally making things up here, so you guys have to go with me, but 3 years, right? And then you also mentioned, did you mention QuickBooks or you mentioned an accounting software?
I mean, I have several that I consider, like,
exactly.
QuickBooks, SurveyMonkey. And then when we're doing that, so if we're doing multiple subscription services, for example, and, QuickBooks and let's say MailChimp are very different. One is for marketing, one is for finance. Do you want us under each one to describe exactly how that is going to benefit the company?
Great question. Because I could see you would prepare like a different paragraph for every single one of these. I think what we want is to say more than just like, having these software will help us streamline our operations. That's one thing that you can say. but also you could say like right now, my admin staff is spending 50% of their time scanning manual receipts or generating manual invoices. We are having difficulty getting participant feedback without the adoption of a web-based survey system. Incorporating these systems is not only going to streamline our operations, so like this is true, yes, but giving like life and vision to what that means for you, your staff, your clients, your community, that's really what's going to send it over the edge versus just saying this one sentence. So you don't necessarily need to enumerate like this is for this person, this is for that, this is for this. You have about 500 words, which is pretty generous. But what we didn't want folks is just to say, you know, that this list of items looks very different than saying, you know, we plan to buy 2 laptops and software that we use for our programming.
Okay. And then, sorry, I know I have one last question.
Oh, fine.
So in our case, you know, we don't have a specific location. We work in different buildings and hotels. We have a educational virtual program where we work with the after school all-stars. So we do tap into kids in Little Haiti and Overtown and all that. So I wanted to kind of better understand how we would, so like our mailing address is not our location.
I know.
Received.
So I actually remember how your application scored, Tanya. It's basically, it's not a binary yes, no, whether you're in one of those historically underserved areas. We have a lot of nonprofits that are not domiciled in that community area, but they predominantly serve them, right? So there is a way in the middle where, because to back up a second, the impetus for that is to like prioritize nonprofits based in those areas that have been historically overlooked. So if you're actually physically located in that community, you get full marks on that question. And if you're not located in that community and you don't render services to that community, you get 0 marks. So I do think in the Juggernaut application, you elaborated on all the locations where you deliver programming, even though you said located in none of the above. So I think that you got partial marks for that question.
Okay.
And so the one thing we wanted to avoid is that, you know, in Miami and all these places throughout the United States, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that are based in affluent areas and serve marginalized communities. We wanted to just give a little bit of an extra leg up for folks who are actually rooted in, based in, and physically located in that community.
Okay.
Any other questions on either the scoring of that particular metric or this purpose question?
Yes, Brittany, I have 2 questions. So the first one, so just kind of going back to, you know, the percentage where you said 25%, 1 in 4 chance of getting the. Then you went through some of the folks who literally were just ineligible to get the funds to begin with, whether it was revenue or the type of products they wanted to buy, et cetera. Did you all break it down further to say, yes, it was a 1 in 4 chance, but of the 75% that didn't get it, another 25% were just ineligible, like off the bat?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ebony. So if people are truthful in the eligibility screener, they actually will not be in this denominator at all. These are all eligible folks. But what happened last year, and to go back to that slide, what happened is that we found maybe people mistakenly said something in the eligibility screener and still got through to the application. And then at the time of scoring that we realized it was this reason. So for example, you know, folks who had not been around for 2 years, maybe there was some confusion. For instance, there were some national nonprofits with a local affiliate who applied. And so it was things like, maybe that's why I say disregarded the eligibility. So they were able to get in now, but for the most part, all 104 were eligible. Unfortunately, the way our software is set up, we don't have a sense of who could have applied, but did not pass the eligibility screener.
Gotcha.
But yeah, is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that was very helpful for sure.
Awesome.
And then the other question was just along the technology. Can you maybe just point of clarification? So for instance, when you were, I thought I had it figured out when you're talking about the software versus hardware, but then you were talking about, or I'm sorry, software versus like equipment.
Yeah.
You were doing that list where you listed out, for instance, SurveyMonkey, QuickBooks, along with like the Mac Airbook. So can you just kind of go back into, you were saying pick one or the other. So for technology, for instance, hardware, laptop and software would fit into one category. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And I recognize it's confusing because we changed it since last year. So if what you want to buy is a technology package, we basically heard user feedback, but like, well, it's one thing to buy a lot of tablets, but if I don't have money to just
Gotcha.
software on them, so you can combine. We still want to know if your request is only going to be hardware or software, or both, and you can bundle both of them. But then the difference then emerges when you want to buy hard fixed assets for your business or your nonprofit that are not technological in nature. So I'll give an example. We funded a community kitchen, a job skills culinary training kitchen last year in West Grove, and they needed like industrial ice machines, industrial stove, industrial freezer. We had some food pantries who got funded, as you saw through that high scoring proposal. Those become more like equipment and machinery items that you need. Maybe you need dollies, right? Maybe you need crates, maybe you need warming plates. Like you can ask for like a whole suite of equipment and machinery. And we just ask that you prioritize at this time either a technology or an equipment investment so that we can, because if you're asking for both, 20,000 runs out really fast.
Right.
So that's kind of the rationale for that design decision.
Perfect. Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Of course, of course. Another thing that I'll recommend is that if you guys want, you can scroll through the list of the grantees that got funded last year on our website. So I'm going to navigate back to the Miami Open for Business website. Under Why Small Business Grantee Stories, you can see, you can see a list of everybody that got funded. And for we derived them from the application. So there might be some errors, but here you can get a sense of, this is just a summary of what folks are using and what they bought it for. So for instance, in the case of Edge Zones, they're just doing equipment, air conditioning, sheetrock, etc. They're not purchasing any technology assets. And then you can just, get a sense of who got funded for what type of purchase. Excellent. So these are really great questions. I hope that this is meaningful for everyone and that you're getting your questions answered. We're going to move on past the purpose question and just walk through kind of the other three. It's not a very long application, but we do want to get a sense of your organization. So moving on beyond the actual funding request and the asset itself, we really want you to help us see the vision. And when this is where you can elaborate on deploying the asset in your organization. And when we say impact, though, we really hope that you can quantify this so that we can maybe measure it in the future. So for example, if you're able to buy one more laptop, can you hire one more part-time student? Can you have one more additional intern or youth volunteer? If you are able to install that AC, what additional number of clients will maybe report being more satisfied with your programming? Or can you be open for more hours a week? I'm trying to translate all of the, small business examples to this context. So maybe for you, that's not going to be increased revenue and sales and clients and customers, but maybe you are serving more students. You're able to be open an extra hour during the after school program. You're able to preserve X number of jobs because folks are no longer using their personal devices and transitioning out of the organization, et cetera. This is where you can really concretize that future vision of having this asset. And then we want you to do so in wherever that is quantifiable. Maybe number of hours that have, been reduced. So back to that QuickBooks and SurveyMonkey example, staff are currently spending 20 hours a month, transcribing paper surveys from clients. This just really helps concretize that impact. And one of the scoring criteria is it will transform the trajectory of your organization. This is where you can really unpack that. The next question is very similar to impact, but it's a little bit less about the asset and more about your organization at large. So we really want to get a sense of what your organization does. This is one of the very few cells where you can enter into your programming. You enter in your programming, your activities, your client share, et cetera. Maybe you specialize in youth. Maybe you specialize in seniors. Maybe you specialize in marine science. What are you doing right now? How are you delivering that? And then what is your future vision? So I'm picking on Cornell again. He's like, we are an economic development agency, but what we really want to do is get our word out through multimedia, right? We do these types of services and convenings, but by having this podcast, we'll be able to transcend South Florida, really become a thought partner. I'm half writing your grant now, so thank you for coming. But this is that idea that you really tell us who your organization is, what you've been able to accomplish, but what are you going to accomplish in the future? As mentioned at the outset, we want to make sure we're not investing in organizations that could potentially shutter in a year or two. So seeing that you have that real nice growth plan, strategic plan, and just future vision really helps us understand where you're trying to go. And then lastly, social impact and social benefit. I mean, in the nonprofit sector, we all know that we're doing something that has a social bottom line, but this is where you can really help unpack that for us. And one of the words that I'll highlight here is to the community in which you work. So the whole objective of this investment from Wells Fargo is to help the local Miami-Dade community. And so what we really want to see is how the work that you're doing benefits this local ecosystem. A lot of folks, for example, in the small business domain as well, like sometimes folks are relying on a lot of like outsourced labor, or maybe they're like exporting a product, or maybe they're serving individuals overseas. That is a very, very important and noble pursuit. But for this opportunity, we want to make sure that every dollar that we give out through this program can create a dividend for the community. So, for example, I spoke with Maria in person last week. We understand that the organization has some sort of like international footprint, but help us understand how that creates opportunity for Venezolanos in Miami, for example. Or maybe there is something that you're doing that's very exceptional on the environmental domain. This is your opportunity to unpack, like, yeah, there's a lot of environmental nonprofits, but what we do is XYZ for our community, for our neighborhoods, for our stakeholders and our clients. So this is where you can include accolades, right? Accolades, awards, nominations, basically anything to really trump up the impact that you've had beyond things that you've responded to already in the questionnaire. So that's it. There's really just 4 narrative questions where you have the opportunity to shine as an organization. We do also want to see a substantiating financial document. And so a lot of folks upload the Form 990, but we do prefer, and if you have an operating budget that lists all of your expenses and incoming revenue, that would be great. And then lastly, this is a fun opportunity for you to upload anything else. So whether this is like videos or programming in action, or maybe you have a rendering of how you want to deploy the asset that you're buying, this is a place where you can include as many supporting documents as you wish. And then we want to know where you found out about this funding opportunity. Let's say that you found out through Radical Partners. Let's try to give them credit in the drop down. And then once you apply, it's in the system. I recommend folks to not submit early. I know everyone's like, oh, I just want to get it off my plate before the 31st. We'd rather you spend more time and sit with it and chip at it over time and then get it in before the 31st than try to get it in early, because we have a feeling that there's a lot that you learned today that you could put into practice in your application. So the draft does save automatically, but as mentioned, you might want to work in it offline, take it to some of your colleagues, get them to do a once over. And yeah, that is the extent of the application.
And then, Brittany, in terms of for like nonprofits, if they've gotten Miami Foundation funding before through the community grant or safe community grants or things like that, that doesn't inhibit them from getting this funding, correct?
Great question. It doesn't at all. We have pretty much we try to treat them very distinctly. So you will not be compared to if you've already gotten money through another funding pool.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
How do we schedule, or where do we schedule the feedback session from our past grant?
I would just email me, Tanya, and we can get on the phone and I can tell you. I won't be able to give you like your specific score, but we'll open it up and we'll talk about like the flavor of what it is that you wrote. And then again, sometimes it's really just about where you ended up in the pile. Like some folks were right below the cusp. They were like number 26 or 27. And so we could either award them a very small amount or push it back and have you reapply for this year. And so in many cases, that's what ended up happening, especially for the folks like yourselves who take the initiative to come to these sessions. Yeah, just email me and then we'll set up a quick 15-minute, 20-minute chat.
Perfect.
Anything else that you folks want to ask about or that you would add and make sure that you get your questions answered?
Just can I just add my 2 cents? This is a grant preparer, just for you all that are like, writing your grants and stuff like that. I think, to Brittany's point, just taking time to really kind of sit with it and like look over stuff. And even kind of how even when I write grants, I take a step back and say, if somebody was reading this and they didn't know my organization, I think a lot of times we're so close to the organization, it's hard to separate. But if you could take a step back and say, if somebody didn't know my organization and they were reading my answers, would they really get an understanding of my impact and what it is that I'm doing, and the value that I'm bringing to my organization? So just if you could switch your brain off, sometimes you just have to drop the application, come back a day or two later and look at it from a different perspective. I think that also helps with the process.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree wholeheartedly. Even like printing it out, making somebody else in your organization read it, just taking time. I'll show you guys the other response, even though it's from the small business domain. So it's going to be a little bit different. We have 2 examples of high and low scoring responses in here. So I just want to make sure that you get the full benefit of the time together. So here, although it's from a small business, here's the same question pretty much. Like, you see how much specificity this organization was able to provide about what they were buying and they were going to deploy in their industrial kitchen. They talk about kind of the model, right? Like they quantify how many stores they're already selling in. They talk about, how they're going to grow, what segments of the market they're going to be able to tap into, quantifying, and just like linking it back to your strategy compared to, this is the extent of the question that was received. $10,000 in order to further and continue the growth of the business. That sounds very similar to continuing to run our operations and assist the community in need. So just really unpacking what it is. And then the one thing I'll show you all is like scoring criteria. We didn't walk through these in too much detail, but you can get them on this webinar, this archived webinar. When we say that this is what we're looking for, this is like how we assess that, right? Your financial statements are strong. You're not running at a deficit for multiple years. If you have, a staffing line item that is substantiated by the number of FTEs you say you have, market share and growth, those words will look a little bit differently in the nonprofit sector, but that's where your strategy and your growth potential comes in, right? We're currently performing plays in 5 locations, but we expect by the end of 2025 to have grown that to 8, et cetera. And then when you get a low ranking on this metric, for example, these are some of the things that drive that metric. And then here we just do the same breakdown for the transform trajectory. So I'm sure also you guys will follow up after this with the recording and the slides, and here you can access those info session slides. Yes, Maya.
Okay, you guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. My question is, like for one of my nonprofit with the church, which fits all the criteria that we went over, I want to know if so I have a media department that I'm over, right? And they want this funding to go directly to that. So when I do all of the paperwork when it comes to income and outcome and budgeting and everything, should I be specific to that or to the whole church and as a whole?
Yeah, so if you're applying, it's funding for a church, right? For a religious institution?
Yes.
Then you would include the entire org budget, not just the one program that you're applying under, because the funding would be going to the organization. It would be cut
and then funded to those.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect.
But let's back up for a second. Maya, help me understand the marketing expenses again. I want to make sure that what you're applying for is going to be eligible.
It's for the church wants to do like a production, start like more, I guess you could say, aiming to do more outreach. And we don't have any funding for technology. Like obviously the budget is tight for the church, but we don't have any money to go towards new camera equipment, streaming software, and everything right now is coming out of the volunteers' pocket. So that's the toss up. We're just trying to find ways to get funded in those areas.
Yeah,
so
that sounds good.
So
awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure sometimes. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There is something else that kind of, you just bring that up too. Volunteers. So I know we have to list the budget, like what is it called?
The staffing.
Yes, the staffing. But we include the volunteers. Obviously, they don't get paid or anything. So, like,
that's a great point. So I would only include paid staff here in this section, but if you want to substantiate your volunteer base, which is probably very impressive, you can add that here in these narrative sections. You could say, our organization currently relies on X number of volunteers who provide Y number of hours, and then even maybe link that to your theory of change for your application.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Any other questions or just curiosities about this funding opportunity?
I have one question regarding, it says, how many clients do you serve?
Yeah.
So in our case, would that be how many audience members do we serve?
That's a great question. I know that you put on performances, but do you also like train staff or like train people to do theater? Because I wonder if those would be your clients.
We put on immersive shows and everybody,
Yeah.
you know, is in a rehearsal period, which is
Yeah.
technically training for that. And then, you know, we have our technical staff, and then we have a virtual educational program. So, I mean,
Yeah.
everybody technically needs to be trained and needs to know how to do what they're doing. I was just wondering if it's the people that we're actually serving are
Yeah.
the clients. So
That's a really great question. I would include both of those, but I would choose maybe in that cell that asks for clients to include your audience reach. And then elsewhere in the narrative questions, you can pull out the quantification of all those other segments, because it sounds like you have multiple stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah. Funders love numbers. I'm sorry. We love to quantify things. And if you can help us see the vision and see the impact and size, we really appreciate it.
Okay.
Awesome. So back to you, Luisana and Itza, if I know we have some other updates about more services and free TA coming your way, but also, you know, any questions about the application itself.
Yes, thank you, Brittany. Well, we have the open office hours, but let me share first about the upcoming technical assistance services that we have for you all. And then I think we can jump into the office hours and answer these specific questions that you might have for your application. Let me share my screen really quick. Oh, can you see my screen?
No yet.
Let me see. Sorry. There you go. Now you can see it, right?
Yeah, we
Okay, awesome. Well, another part of this call that we wanted to share with you all is your technical assistance journey that we're going to be providing as theoretical partners, as I was mentioning with you all at the beginning. So the eligibility for a technical assistance for Miami Open for Business is that it's free for all Miami-based nonprofit leaders and staff. So I'm going to be walking a little bit more into what's going to be the whole technical assistance program, but just to know, it's open for everybody. That again, it's working on a nonprofit base in Miami-Dade. So based on what we have learned that's needed, or like that could support the most the nonprofit organizations, are three main pillars that we're going to be offering for the next year and a half. So for the first one, we're going to be offering different virtual workshops around 5 topic areas that I'm going to be talking about it in a minute to accelerate your knowledge around nonprofit management. The second offering that we're going to be having is individual office hours, which are going to be opportunities for you to book one-on-one office hours with topic experts to support you on achieving your goals. And again, these are going to be based on the 5 topics that we have identified that are the most needed on nonprofit organizations. And the third one is we're going to be having in-person mastermind sessions, which are going to be collaborative sessions to learn from and about each other within the social impact ecosystem and sharing best practices. So the main 5 topics that we're going to be touching on for the next year and a half are these main pillars that we have identified are needed for the nonprofit organization management. So the first one is going to be strategy, and we're going to be looking at your community problem or the community problem that you're tackling with a critical eye. Then we're going to be talking about fundraising, so demystifying budget, fundraising, empower your organization with concrete tools and a strategy for you to maximize your funding pool. Operations, so we're going to learn about organizational structure, discovering different platforms that will help you to optimize your work. Communications, which we're going to be focusing on your target audiences, reflect your mission and how to amplify your brand. And finally, we're going to be talking about sustainability, so identifying measurement tools and how you can assess the impact of your organization, following on what Brittany was saying about numbers, how they're needed for organizations. So again, all of the things that we're going to be working on for this year and a half are going to be based on these 5 topics. I want to share with you a little bit more about the timeline. So we're going to be having virtual group workshops the third week of every month from 2023 to May 2024. And it's divided on this timeline as you see here on the screen. So on June, we're going to be starting on strategy, working on your theory of change and comparative analysis. On July, we're going to be focusing on project planning. Then moving on August, we're going to go into the second pillar, which is going to be fundraising and talking about budgeting and different budgeting trackers for your organization. Then we're going to go into the fundraising strategies in September. In October, we're going to be shifting to operations, thinking about project planning and how could you optimize your organization staff to maximize your impact. And then on November, we're going to be working on the platforms itself. We're going to take a break between November and February 2024, where we're going to be going back and focusing on your communication, so building your brand, and then on March, deploying your brand. And then on April, we're going to be talking about sustainability, which is going to be focused on impact evaluation, and then wrapping it up in May for reporting. Then towards the second half of the following year, we're going to be focusing on the in-person mastermind sessions, which we thought is important for all of us to have like the opportunity to collaborate within different nonprofit organizations and within the ecosystem. Thinking that like sharing best practices, it would be beneficial for each organization. So again, each of these sessions are going to be focused on the pillars that we're going to be working on this year. So we're going to be having a session on strategy, a session on fundraising, a session on operations, communications, and sustainability. And within that whole year and a half, you're going to be having the opportunity to book individual office hours with topic experts. So the idea for these individual office hours is that if you have any questions regarding operation, regarding strategy, and communications, impact evaluation, you're going to be having a roster of different topic experts. These are going to be coaches and accountants and lawyers that can help you to answer specific questions and execute whatever you needed on those 45-minute slots. So these are going to be booked as needed. We're going to be sharing a website where you can have access to all of these resources. At the moment, you can access radical.partners/Miami Open for Business, where you can see all of the information that I just shared with you, and I go deep into that. And we're going to make available the intake form where we would need your information on anybody that is going to be taking advantage of the technical assistance program for us to share the next steps into how you can sign up for the virtual sessions, how you can sign up for the in-person sessions, and how you can sign up for the office hours, individual office hours with the topic experts. So that is a lot of information. I don't know if you have any questions in the meantime right now. So you're definitely going to be hearing from us, specifically from me via email, for you to sign up through the intake form. And again, you can share this with any member of your staff, of your team staff that would benefit from any of these workshop sessions. And you don't necessarily have to be awarded. The microgrant is actually open for everybody. So even if you applied and you were not awarded to the microgrant, you can still take advantage of the technical assistance program for the next year and a half.
And also, Luisana, do you have to be eligible for Open for Business programs, financial programs, to do the capacity building?
As long as you're a nonprofit organization in Miami, you're eligible to access the resources.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course. We're super excited to, as we were saying, your radical partners on this next year and a half through the technical assistance. So the next thing, sorry. Yes.
Oh no, I was going to ask you for yours. So you have the sessions. Do you all like provide like specific like one-on-one type of coaching with organizations as well at no cost, or how does that work?
Yes. So as part of the one-on-one office hours, we're going to be having two different types. So we're going to be having strategic office hours with the Radical Partners team, where we can brainstorm any questions that you might have or any assistance you might have like overall with your organization. And then we're going to be having the topic-based office hours, which are going to be, as I was mentioning, with like lawyers and accountants and communications experts, where you can actually bring your questions, or like, I'm not sure, like, for example, you have a question about like, how can I do my marketing plan, for example, right? I have no idea how to do this. You're going to be having some coaches available on the website where you can book directly with that person to answer that specific question.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. So the only thing that we ask for you to be able to access all of these resources is to submit your intake form, which are going to be available on the website in the next following days. And again, we're also going to be sharing this via email. Any other questions? Awesome. So for the next part, we still have 1 hour left on this call. So we created different breakout rooms for us to go over your application. If you have any specific questions, if you want two pair of eyes to look at your application and any like any of your narratives. So we're gonna be Brittany and It's gonna be in one room, and Brenda and myself are gonna be in another room. So you are able to jump either room if you want. So I'm gonna be opening the breakout rooms now, and we have until like around 11:30, and then I don't know, Brittany, if you have any other next steps that you want to share with the group.
Not at this time. I definitely feel like I spoke a lot and gave you guys a lot of information. You know when the deadline is, you know how to get extra support from us. But now is like a really nice opportunity also to maybe go into more detail about what you're thinking about asking for and get some live on-demand coaching today.
Awesome. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms, and it's going to pop up on your screen to which room you want to just join. And again, a member of the Radical Partners team and the Miami Foundation will be on each room. Thank you, Ebony. Did it appear for you? I'll add you there to each room.
Oh.
Maria, were you able to see it? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm only seeing one.
Yes, you can do whichever. We're going to be answering the same
Okay.
questions.
Oh.
Maya, Eliana, do you have any questions?